Hey guys, if you were born a literate slave in colonial Brazil, congratulations. You've just achieved one of the rarest, most feared statuses in the entire empire. Not rich, not free, not even healthy, but dangerous, just by knowing how to string a few letters together. You're not just property now. You're a threat. You're born under a thatched roof, in a clearing surrounded by sugarcane, so tall it blocks out the stars on cloudy nights. The floor beneath you is packed earth. The air smells like smoke, salt sweat, and cane molasses. Sweet, but heavy. You're tiny, maybe 5 pounds, thin-limbed and slick with afterbirth, wrapped quickly in a strip of worn cloth that was once part of someone's work tunic. No doctors, no fanfare. Just your mother, kneeling on a straw mat with a midwife crouched nearby, her hands steady and voice low. She doesn't cry. She doesn't smile either. She just breathes you into the world and ties the cord with a thread of sugarcane fiber. You probably won't survive this. That's not sarcasm, it's math. Infant mortality for enslaved people in 18th century Portuguese Brazil is catastrophically high. But you're lucky. Your mother is strong, her milk is flowing, and the mosquitoes aren't too thick this month. You make it through the first night, then the first week, and then, somehow, through the first rainy season. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in a senzala, a slave hut, on a fazenda somewhere between the forest and the coast. Your parents are Creoles, meaning they were born here, not brought on ships. But your grandparents remember the boats. You grow up hearing those memories in whispers, not words. Your name is chosen quickly, carelessly. Probably after a saint or a sugar merchant. No last name, no patronym, just whatever the overseer can pronounce that day. You're not told your birth date. No one writes it down. Time for you is measured by harvests, not calendars. You are not baptized right away. That costs money. The priest will get to you when he gets to you. When he does, he'll dunk your head in cold water, mutter Latin over you, and give you another name. Longer, holier, more acceptable to the god who watches this plantation from a very comfortable distance. You sleep beside your mother, on a mat, stuffed with dry grass. Her arms are the warmest place you'll ever know. She smells like wood smoke and calloused skin, and the oil from the seed she rubs into her hair. When she sings, it's half lullaby, half warning. Sometimes it's in Portuguese. Sometimes it's in a language that doesn't have books. You don't know it, but your mother is watching your eyes closely. She watches how you stare at shadows, how you trace patterns in the dust with your finger. She worries, not about your health, not about your strength, but about your cleverness. Clever children don't always last. Clever children draw attention. You grow quickly, as children do when they're given just enough to eat and just little enough to stay small. You suck on sugarcane before you have teeth. You learn to walk barefoot over gravel. You learn to be quiet when you hear footsteps near the hut. You are not taught letters. That's not an accident. The law doesn't say slaves must not read. Not exactly. But everyone knows. Reading leads to thinking. Thinking leads to ideas. Ideas lead to trouble. And the Portuguese crown, sitting in its splendid halls across the ocean, is still haunted by a nightmare. A slave who can read a map. Or worse, a law. You watch the master scribble into ledgers. He never looks at you. He doesn't have to. His pen controls your hours, your rations, your fate. He writes in books that you are never allowed to touch. Books with soft pages and hard bindings and the scent of ink that reminds you of crushed leaves and secrets. Sometimes a Jesuit priest visits. He preaches to the children of the master. He brings books. He teaches them to read in Latin, which to your ears sounds like birds arguing. He speaks of salvation, of heaven, of rules that must be followed. He does not look at you except to say silencio when your voice drifts through the window. But you listen. You always listen because you want to know what those markings mean. Those little shapes that seem to pull power from nothing. You see your master laugh after reading a letter. You see your mother frown after hearing him read a notice aloud. You see the overseer read a list of punishments. You don't know what the words are, but you know they hurt. And one night, just once, you see something strange. Your father, sitting by the fire after most have gone to sleep, holds a strip of cloth with markings burned into it. Symbols made from charcoal. Not Portuguese, not Latin, but something. You ask him what it means. He doesn't answer. He just says, never copy what you can't hide. You don't forget that. And so, in the years that follow, you begin to look at letters the way others look at rivers. With longing, with fear, and with a growing need to cross. You will learn to read, but not from a school, not from a book, not even from a teacher. You'll learn from the shape of danger, from the scent of ink, from the silence that falls when a free man speaks, and the enslaved listen too closely, and every word you ever manage to understand will come at a cost. But for now, you are still just a child, wrapped in rough cloth, carried on your mother's back, dreaming beneath a sky full of stars. You do not yet know what it means to be feared. But one day you will. The first thing you learn to fear is tone, not words. Words, after all, are not yours. Not yet. They swirl around you like smoke from the cooking fire, floating in the air, curling above your head, always out of reach. But tone you understand. The snap of the overseer's command, the hiss in your mother's whisper, the thunder in your father's silence. You grow up surrounded by sound you cannot decipher. Portuguese barked across the fields, Latin muttered in the chapel, Kimbundu sung in lullabies, Yoruba chanted at dusk. These languages stack like firewood in your ears, forming a wall between you and the world that rules you. A wall of syllables and suspicion. No one speaks to you with words. They speak at you. Corre, carrega, silencio. You obey the sounds, not the meanings. It's a long time before you realize that what they say is often less important than how they say it. The master's son, for example, says, por favor, when asking for more sugar. The overseer never says, please, when he orders a child to be tied to the post. And the priest, he speaks in a tone that's both bored and scolding, as if God himself is just another employer with poor handwriting and too many opinions. You listen, always listening. Even when you're not supposed to be near. You perch on stone steps, pretending to do something with a basket, when really, you're collecting sounds. You're piecing together a puzzle, not knowing what it will become. One day, you hear the word livro, book. You don't know what it means yet, but the way the word lands, gently, respectfully, as if it's something fragile, makes you curious. It sounds like a secret, and so your ears become your first school. You learn early that your voice isn't always welcome, so you use your face instead. You nod when someone gestures. You keep still when someone curses. You laugh only when the others do, sometimes half a second late, hoping to get it right. Your mother talks to you at night, quietly, when the others sleep. She doesn't read. She's never seen a letter. But her stories are full of wisdom passed mouth to mouth, not hand to page. She tells of a king who had 12 wives and no time to bathe, of a fox who tricked a governor, of a girl who was born with a song in her throat instead of a voice. You ask where these stories come from, she says. Before words were written, we carried them on our backs. You don't understand yet, but you nod anyway. The priest visits more often now. He preaches in Portuguese, sometimes in Latin. He gestures to the air and speaks of heaven and sin and the eternal kingdom. He always makes sure to say that all souls are equal, but he only teaches the master's children how to read the Gospels. Sometimes you sneak behind the chapel during lessons just to hear. The priest drills the children A, B, C, D. You repeat the sounds under your breath later while feeding the chickens. You press your foot into the dirt and draw the shapes with your toes. You don't know what they mean, but they feel powerful, like tools, like keys. Your father watches you once. He says nothing, just walks away, slowly, as if trying to decide whether to pretend he never saw. You see the books in the big house. You're not allowed to touch them, not even to dust them. That's the housemaid's job, and she's always careful not to leave fingerprints. The books live in a glass cabinet. You once saw the master strike a servant who accidentally dropped a volume on the Psalms. The blow wasn't hard, but the message was, books are not for you, but that doesn't stop you. You start following the master's son when he practices letters. He traces the alphabet on a slate with chalk. He complains, he fidgets, he draws little birds in the margins. You squat outside the open window and mimic his movements later with a stick in the dirt. You don't get it right at first. The shapes wobble. Some letters look like others. But slowly, you begin to see the patterns. You begin to recognize that words live inside these strange lines. One day, you find a broken fragment of slate near the trash pile behind the house. You keep it. Hide it under your sleeping mat. You rub it against rock until the edges are smooth. You steal bits of charcoal from the cooking fire and practice at night, tracing words in secret. You don't know what you're writing. Not yet. But you know you're writing, and that's enough. Your fingers stain with ash. Your eyes adjust to the dim light. You learn to hide the slate quickly when footsteps approach. You whisper the letters into your palm, over and over, like prayer. Your mother catches you once. She doesn't scold you. She doesn't tell the others. She just says, Be careful what you make with your hands. Not everything that builds can be seen. You carry that sentence with you. Like a hidden blade, soon you begin to recognize words in the wild, a stamp on a sugar barrel, a carving on a wall, the priest's list of names. You pretend not to notice. But you do, and one day you read a whole word aloud. Deus, God. It's carved into the altar wood. You sound it out slowly, syllable by syllable. It doesn't feel like magic. It feels like opening a locked box. You grin, but no one must see you, because words, to the people who own your body, are more dangerous than weapons. And you've just picked up your first one. Your mother has always sung while she works. Low, rhythmic, and steady, like the churn of the mill wheels. As a child, you thought she was simply humming to pass the time, to soften the ache in her arms or to keep the flies out of her mouth. But now that your ear is sharper and your mind more restless, you begin to hear something else beneath her songs. Something encoded. You realize that the words she sings sometimes shift slightly when strangers walk past. That certain verses always fall on certain days. That the songs change depending on who is listening. She doesn't teach you directly. There is no pointing, no correcting, no repeat after me. But the way she sings a line while packing cassava leaves, then stops and stares into the fire, tells you there's more. The women in the senzala pass these verses to each other like bread. Sometimes they hum them while planting. Sometimes they murmur them while braiding each other's hair. Some of the songs have lines in Kimbundu or Kikongo or Yoruba, tongues you don't fully understand but can feel pressing against your skin, like warm air. Some lines rhyme, some don't, but they all hide something. You begin to test them, whispering a verse to yourself, then changing one word to see if the rhythm still works. You discover patterns. Some songs are about ancestors, but they're sung to the rhythm of Catholic hymns. Others are about the Virgin Mary, but use the names of African spirits. You ask your mother, softly, "What do the words mean?" She shrugs and says, "Depends who's listening." It's not a real answer, but it's the truth. You learn that there are two languages in every sentence. The one for show, and the one for those who know. And slowly, you begin to know. The men rarely sing, but they hum when they work, deep in the throat, with teeth closed. These sounds also mean things, warnings, signals. Sometimes you see an old man tap his hoe 3 times in the dirt, pause, then hum a note. It's a conversation without words, and still you watch, you listen. Your fingers itch to write down what you're hearing, but you can't. Not yet. You don't have enough words, not enough shapes, not enough rules to wrap the meanings in. So you do the next best thing. You start to repeat the songs at night, quietly, just for yourself. You mimic the inflections. You test how fast you can sing and still keep the rhythm. You notice that some verses are warnings about bad weather, about the master's mood, about who's been caught stealing. Others are dreams, about return, about escape, about invisible cities beyond the forest, where no one has a chain around their ankle. You dream of those cities. You imagine that maybe in those hidden places, people not only sing, they write, they read, they speak words that are not borrowed. not filtered through another man's power. And for the first time, you begin to wonder if reading could be more than copying the master. Maybe it could be reclaiming the stories your mother hides in lullabies. One afternoon, you hear a song that's different. A woman visiting from another plantation sings it while tending to a sick child. Her voice is older, cracked but strong. The lyrics make no sense to you, but the tune is oddly familiar. She sings of a city of books buried in the sea, of pages made from fish skin, of a queen who could read the wind. You ask her where the song is from. She says, "From a place where paper doesn't rot, and no one forgets anything." You don't believe her, but you want to. You start paying more attention to rhythm, to rhyme. You try turning your own thoughts into couplets. You fail at first. Your lines are uneven, clumsy, but eventually, you manage a full verse about a mango falling from a tree and hitting the overseer's dog. You repeat it to yourself all day. You recite it to the chickens. They seem unimpressed, but still, you made it. You created something. That night, lying beside your mother, you whisper the verse in her ear. She doesn't laugh. She nods once, says, "Careful, that's sharp." You feel proud and afraid because now you understand. Words are blades, and songs are scabbards, and your mother has been hiding knives in plain sight your entire life. You also notice something else. The songs shift when someone dies, when a friend is beaten, when the priest preaches too long. You begin to map emotion to melody. If a certain tune is sung 3 days in a row, something's coming. If no one sings, something already happened. You invent your own method of notation. On a piece of wood you find discarded behind the sugar mill, you carve tiny grooves, one for each time you hear a line repeated. You pretend it's just a scrap for kindling, but you polish it each night with oil from cassava leaves. It's not writing, but it's something close. You start to dream in verses. One night, you wake with a line in your head that rhymes in 3 languages. You scramble in the dark, tracing it in the dirt beside your sleeping mat, hoping to preserve the rhythm before it flees. You whisper it again and again, and you realize you are building a memory palace, not with stone, but with sound. Each phrase a brick, each rhyme a step. You're walking your way out of silence. The next day, the master hosts guests from the capital. They drink too much and laugh too loud. The house slaves bustle and nod. The children chase chickens through the courtyard. And you? You hum a tune just under your breath. A nonsense rhyme about governors with donkey ears. One of the guests hears it and stops. He frowns. "Where did you hear that?" You lie. "From my mother." He laughs, then mutters something about savages with sharp tongues. He doesn't know it, but he's almost right, because you're becoming sharper every day. And all your edges are hidden in lullabies. You begin to notice how everything important on the plantation is written down, but never for you. Never for your people. Every sack of flour, every hour of labor, every lash of the whip, it all gets recorded. There is always someone, usually pale and squinting, hunched over a ledger with a quill scratching quietly, like a rat in the dark. And that's how you start to understand something crucial. Power is alphabetical. The master doesn't lift a finger, but his words on paper command men to bleed, women to cook, children to carry water twice their weight. The overseer doesn't argue with the ledger. He follows it, line by line, as if it was scripture. The book says which field you harvest, which punishment you receive, which name you're allowed to have. You don't remember your real name. Your mother says it was something that started with a soft syllable, something that meant moon or blessing or maybe just second born. But it was changed, scribbled in ink by someone who didn't bother to ask. Now on the roster, you're called Bento. Or was it Bene? It changes depending on who reads it. You start watching the master's clerk, a frail man with red eyes and ink-stained fingers. He arrives every morning with a book under one arm and a smell like dried ink and sweat. He never speaks to you. He doesn't need to. His quill does all the shouting. You study the way his hand moves. Fast when he's angry. Slower when he's bored. You begin to see that some pages are marked with strange symbols, like crowns and crosses. Others are just long lists of names and weights and numbers you don't yet understand. But one day you see a page titled Inventario de Bens, Inventory of Goods, and listed among barrels, tools, and livestock are names. Names like yours. You aren't a person in that book. You're an item, a possession. Your weight is noted, your age, the value they estimate you could fetch if sold inland, and it hits you. Books aren't just about learning. They're about ownership, about who gets to define the world. That night, you lie awake for a long time. The wind outside murmurs through the sugarcane. Somewhere, an old woman groans in her sleep. But you're thinking about how that book could be rewritten, how the lines could be rearranged, how the inventory might one day list empty spaces beside the names of the escaped. You start tracing letters again, but this time you form your own words. You write the name your mother once whispered to you. You don't know if it's spelled right, but it feels right. The dirt becomes your page, the stick your pen, the night your classroom. You get caught eventually. A house servant walks past and sees you drawing letters beside the fire. She gasps, drops the basket she's carrying. Você tá escrevendo? You freeze, deny it. Laugh, rub the dirt away with your foot. She doesn't report you, but she stops talking to you. From that day on, she watches you like you've grown horns, because now you're dangerous. A child who scratches lines in the ground might one day carve sentences in stone, might one day write a complaint. Or worse, a plan. You try to be more careful. You stop using sticks. You trace letters with your finger, then smooth them away like a breeze. You pretend not to notice the pages the clerk leaves behind on the porch when he's careless. But you notice. And sometimes you steal one. Just a scrap, just enough. You start practicing letters in secret with charcoal bits on those scraps. You copy anything. Names, prizes, phrases in Portuguese you don't yet understand. You imitate the clerk's style, slanted and cramped. You mimic the priest's wider, rounder Latin script. Eventually, you realize that writing is like drumming. It has rhythm. Some letters are loud, like B. Others are soft, like S. You experiment with combinations, not knowing what they say, but enjoying the feel of them under your fingers. You make up your own code. Circles mean family. Crosses mean danger. 3 dots in a row mean silence. You begin to see writing not just as language, but as memory. A way to trap thought and save it for later. Like drying cassava to store for famine. One day, you see the master arguing with the merchant. The merchant has a document. He holds it up, shakes it in the master's face. The master grows red and yells, but the paper wins. Whatever's written on it, it holds more power than shouting. And that's when you know ink is louder than voice, paper heavier than fists. The merchant leaves with the cart full of goods. The master mutters and slams the door. And you wonder, what would it take to write something that makes a man like that back down? You try to find out. You sneak peeks at the priest's hymnals. You examine the stamps on sugar barrels. You steal another scrap from the clerk's desk. A receipt for tobacco shipment. You don't understand the numbers yet, but you copy the form. Date, recipient, quantity, signature. You try to forge one yourself. You make up a date, a name, a shipment of 2 barrels of fish. You sign it with a flourish and laugh. No one would believe it, but the structure, the shape of power is there. That's when you start carrying a small charcoal nub in your waistband. Not for drawing, for writing. You find a flat stone behind the mill, where no one goes. You sit there in the evenings, pretending to pick weeds. But really, you're tracing invisible letters with charcoal, learning how words feel under your fingers. You get better. You invent names, phrases, questions. Sometimes you write things just to see them. Like, why? Who decides? What if we said no? You erase them quickly. Always. But still, you wrote them. And that's more than most would dare. Because here, on this plantation, letters are a fence. And you've started climbing. The church bells ring every Sunday morning. Slow and syrupy, like they're reluctant to wake. You're made to sit at the back of the chapel. Sometimes outside, in the dust, depending on the mood of the priest. You don't really understand the sermons, but you understand the looks. You understand the seating. And you definitely understand when the priest preaches about obedience, about servitude, about divine order. There's a big book on the altar. He holds it up with reverence. Its pages are edged in gold, its cover carved with saints whose eyes seem always closed. You think at first that it must be full of magic. The way he touches it, the way the others bow their heads when he opens it. It has weight, not just in size, but in spirit. But over time, you begin to suspect something else. That the book isn't magic, it's permission. You hear words in Latin, servus servorum Dei, servant of the servants of God. But no one says what that means. Sometimes he reads from Paul's letters, quoting about slaves obeying their masters. Other times, he talks about sin, about salvation, about paradise, waiting for the patient. You notice something peculiar. When the priest preaches in Portuguese, the slaves pay attention. When he slips into Latin, they shift, grow still. Not out of reverence, out of detachment. Because Latin is not a language for them. It's a lock with no key. You start asking questions, quietly, carefully. You ask why only the boys from the white families are allowed into the little school attached to the chapel. You ask what's in the big book besides sermons. You ask why only the priest is allowed to read it out loud. Your mother hushes you with a look. Your uncle tells you not to be stupid. Words like those, he warns, are a noose dressed as a necklace. Still, your curiosity grows, especially when you notice that the priest's assistant, a mulatto boy a few years older than you, occasionally mutters Latin phrases under his breath when he thinks no one is listening. Sometimes you see him scribbling on scraps of waxed paper with a goose feather, dipped in what looks like berry juice. One day, you're cleaning the chapel floor. The pews are empty, the air thick with candle smoke and incense. The priest is out, visiting a dying planter. You pass by the lectern and there it is, unlocked, unattended. The great book. You hesitate, but only for a moment. You lift the cover. The hinges groan softly, like they're warning you. Inside, dense lines of text, some in black, some in red. Illustrations in the margins. Angels with flaming swords. Demons with too many eyes. And letters. Rows and rows of them, twisting across the pages like snakes with secrets. You don't understand most of it, but one word stands out. Not because you know what it means, but because you see it often in the priest's sermons. It starts with a big D. It's written in red. It repeats over and over, usually near verses about punishment. You copy the shape of it onto your arm with your fingertip. Dominus. You don't know what it means yet. But it feels heavy. You close the book and step away. From that moment on, you begin to listen differently. Not just to the sermons, but to the cadence, the rhythm. You start memorizing fragments in Latin. Words like servire, legem, veritas. You don't know their meanings, but you file them away like pebbles in a pouch. One day, you whisper a line you remember from the Mass, repeating it as you sweep the steps. The mulatto assistant freezes, eyes wide. Where did you hear that? You shrug. He says it every Sunday. He stares. Then he looks over his shoulder and motions for you to follow him behind the chapel. There, tucked behind the crumbling wall, he pulls out a tiny slate board. It's cracked. The chalk is just a stub. But he hands it to you anyway. Write what you said. You hesitate. Then you draw the letters. Not perfectly, but close enough. He nods, says nothing. The next day, he brings you a piece of parchment with faint ink marks. Latin phrases side by side with rough Portuguese translations. And below, a sentence. Ler é saber. É saber é poder. Reading is knowing, and knowing is power. You hold the parchment like it's a flame. For the next few weeks, you meet him when no one is watching. He shows you letters, explains that Latin is the language of the church, and Portuguese the language of the crown. He teaches you the word Dominus means Lord, Master, Owner. It burns your tongue when you say it. He teaches you a few more. Servus, libertas, scriptura. Then one day, he disappears. The priest says he was sent away. But no one knows where or why. You search for the slate, but it's gone. Only a dark stain remains on the chapel wall, like ink that won't wash off. You return to sweeping, but now every time the priest preaches, you translate silently in your head. Not every word, but enough. And you begin to realize the terrifying truth. The same words used to justify your chains are the ones that could set you free. If only you knew how to rearrange them. You grow quiet, observant. You start listening, not just for meaning, but for weakness. For places where the words contradict. The priest says God loves all his children, but only some children are allowed to read his letters. That's a loophole, a crack. And you've learned by now, even the smallest crack can let the light in. You begin learning in earnest the way some people learn to steal. Cautiously, compulsively, always with one eye behind your shoulder. There's no teacher anymore, not since the priest's assistant vanished. But you've already started to pick the lock. Letters aren't shapes anymore. They're sounds. Sounds aren't just echoes, they're meanings. And you're hungry for meaning the way others hunger for cassava. You steal chalk dust from the schoolroom. You scrape it into the heel of your sandal and tap it out later, in the dark, when the stars are your only witnesses. You draw letters on the flat stones behind the sugar press, your fingers blistered from grinding cane by day, your mind racing through consonants by night. It's not glamorous. It's not even brave. It's just survival with syllables. You scratch out every word you remember hearing. Liberdade, señor, escravo. Some words sting to write. Others feel like stolen honey. Too sweet, too dangerous. Then comes the moment. It starts with a favor. One of the houseboys is asked to deliver a message. A short one, verbal, to the neighboring plantation. He's panicking. The master's handwriting is illegible. The other boy can't read it. He doesn't want to ask for help and appear ignorant. You offer quietly, "I can try." He stares at you like you've just announced you can fly. But you take the crumpled note. The letters are spidery and rushed, but you can make them out. Barely. Something about sugar shipment. A new crate of iron chains. 4 barrels. 2 names. 1 date. You read it aloud, careful not to flinch at the contents. The boy swallows hard. You weren't supposed to know that. You nod. You weren't. But now you do. From then on, word spreads, softly, cautiously, that you can read. Not fluently, not confidently, but enough. An old woman slips you a page from a prayer book she found buried in the dirt. "Tell me what this says." Her eyes are clouded with age, but her hope is clear as water. You fumble through it, syllable by syllable, until the words form a sentence. A alma busca a luz. The soul seeks light. She closes her eyes. "Yes," she whispers. "Yes, it does." A teenage boy asks you to teach him his name. His real name. The one his grandfather whispered in Kikongo before they took him away. You don't know how to write Kikongo, but you write it phonetically, together, over and over, until it feels right in both your hands. You start hoarding fragments, paper scraps, torn corners of shipping invoices, water-stained catechism pages, broken buttons with letters stamped into them. A small cloth pouch becomes your library. You hide it in a hollow gourd beneath the tool shed, guarded by 3 angry geckos and a superstitious pig. You read everything. Labels on crates, tattoos on sailors, the back of a soap wrapper a merchant tossed aside. One day you find a leaf of newsprint used to wrap dried fish. You flatten it carefully, clean the oil with corn husk fibers, and squint at the tiny typeface. Something about the crown, the colonies, commerce. The words feel foreign, yet somehow familiar, like being spoken about in a room you're not allowed to enter. And one evening, you're bold enough to write something of your own. Not a copy, not a name, a thought. You press the stub of charcoal onto a washed scrap of sackcloth and trace the words slowly. Se o Senhor não pode ler a minha dor, então não é meu Senhor. If the master cannot read my pain, then he is not my master. You hide it beneath a stone and walk away. But your fingers remember the sentence, replaying it like a prayer. Soon you realize you're changing. You speak less, you listen more, you measure words the way you'd measure rice during a drought. Carefully, painfully, knowing too much will draw notice. You ask to clean the overseer's office, not for the dust, but for the documents. Not to understand everything, but to recognize everything. The word punir, for instance, written in the margin of a list of names. You're on that list. You don't tell anyone. But you sleep facing the door that night. Evenings become your sacred hours. You carry a dry piece of sugarcane in your mouth to pretend you're chewing. So no one will notice your lips moving as you sound out the syllables from memory. Desobediencia, castigo, liberdade. They dance on your tongue like ghosts asking to be remembered. You invent ways to test yourself. Can you read a word upside down? Can you guess its meaning without hearing it? Can you make a sentence out of words from 3 different pages? Then one day, you make your first copy. You find a blank space on the back of a spoiled shipment record. You take a blunt nail and etch into the wood of an abandoned crate a single shaky line from the priest's Latin hymn, Elux in tenebris luce, and the light shines in the darkness. Your hands tremble, not from fear, from knowing. You're not just memorizing anymore. You're claiming. You don't tell anyone what you've written, but you keep returning to that crate, brushing off the rain, tracing your fingertip along the groove, whispering the line again and again. Because now you have more than words. You have a voice, even if it's still only heard in your own head. And slowly, letter by letter, you begin to believe that this quiet defiance might just be enough to shake the silence. You're 16 the year the barrels arrive. They roll into the plantation one humid morning, their lids no creaking like old teeth, their sides banded with rust. Officially, they're marked azúcar bruto, raw sugar. You help unload them, sticky molasses staining your hands, the scent sweet and slightly sour like spoiled syrup. But one of the barrels feels off, heavier than the others. No sugar dust clings to the rim, and when it tips slightly, there's a dull clunk inside, not the soft grind of granules. You glance at the overseer. He's wiping his brow, not paying attention. You use the edge of your foot to gently shift the barrel's angle. Another thud. Wood on paper, paper on something else. Later, in the half-dark of the storage barn, you come back. You wedge a sugar spoon beneath the lid and pry it open with slow, aching care. The top pops, groaning like it's waking from a 100-year sleep. You peer inside and see paper. Dozens of pages, tightly bound in brown cloth, stitched with coarse thread, sealed with beeswax. You pull one bundle out and cradle it like an infant. Your heart is thudding, not from fear, but from reverence. These aren't plantation records or church sermons. You recognize that immediately. The letters are printed. Neatly, professionally. The paper is rough, but intact. One bundle contains copied chapters from the Imitation of Christ. Another, a dog-eared catechism. One thin sheaf, almost tossed in like an afterthought, holds satirical poems, mischievous rhymes, mocking colonial taxes and the clergy, and at the very bottom, a single sheet in elegant cursive. A passage from Os Luciadas. You don't understand all the words yet, but one line sinks straight into your bones. Mais do que prometia a força humana. More than human strength had promised. You wrap the bundle and hide it beneath a broken crate. Over the next days, you invent reasons to return. Fixing a slat, checking for rats, sweeping nothing. Every time, your eyes devour more lines. You learn to trace the shape of poems in silence. You whisper rhymes into the folds of your shirt when passing others to see if they notice. They don't. But one person does. Her name is Lucia. She was born free, then sold into slavery during a debt dispute involving her grandfather. You've never seen her read. But one afternoon, as you mutter a line from the satirical poem while feeding chickens, she smirks and replies with the next line. You both freeze. Then she says, in the flattest voice imaginable, you miss the meter. From that day on, you share the barrel. One reads aloud, the other repeats. Then you switch. It becomes your secret school. You don't call it that, but it is. You begin copying the poems onto cloth scraps and slipping them into fence posts, into tree bark slits, between the leaves of the drying barn. One disappears, then another. Someone is taking them. You don't know who, but you write more. Soon messages start coming back. Someone responds with an added stanza. Another corrects your spelling. Once, you find a tiny drawing next to your copied verse. An inked star with a cracked chain beneath it. You laugh so hard, you almost cry. It's a network, a silent one. Invisible, yes, but real. Words passed from one calloused hand to another, folded beneath aprons, hidden inside broom handles, whispered in hammocks at night. The barrel becomes less of a container and more of a portal. And here's the strangest part. No one talks about it, not openly, not even you and Lucia. But when someone's rhythm improves, when they no longer pause at PH or C, you nod, and they nod back. And that's enough. You begin writing your own lines. At first, clumsy, then slightly better, then good enough that someone thinks it's a found poem and leaves a tiny feather beside it in appreciation. You write? A língua que me chicoteia é a mesma com que eu rezo. The tongue that lashes me is the same with which I pray. It spreads. You find it chalked onto a tree root. Someone etched it in soapstone near the water trough. One morning, you overhear the stable boy humming its rhythm beneath his breath. You don't say it's yours. You don't have to. You begin to realize the words are no longer only yours. They belong to everyone who risks being caught for repeating them. But danger is never far. One night, you return to the barn and find the barrel missing. Panic floods you. You search the corners. You dig through other crates. Nothing. The next morning, the overseer announces that a shipment was spoiled by rats and burned. But his eyes lock onto you for a moment too long. You keep your face blank, your voice even. You say nothing. Later, Lucia meets you by the fence. Her dress smells faintly of smoke. Some pages survived, she says. You both say no more. But that night, you light a lamp and begin writing again. On sugar parchment this time, using ink made from boiled leaves and soot. Because now you know, barrels rot, ink fades, but verse, especially forbidden verse, tends to linger like ash in the folds of memory. And even if the Portuguese crown sent 1,000 barrels to burn, the words would still smolder inside the minds of those who had already tasted their heat. It happens just after sunrise, the kind of golden morning that pretends to be peaceful, while cicadas scream warnings from every tree branch. You're kneeling near the chapel, washing the stone steps as penance for a fabricated infraction. Something about spilling beans that had already been rotting in the sun. Your hands are raw, the water cold, the soap nearly dissolved into a grey smear. And then you see it. A shadow, thick and heavy, falling across your arms. You look up. The overseer stands there, not speaking. In his hand, a damp, folded page. You recognize the handwriting instantly. It's yours. The rhythm, unmistakable. Até os pássaros cativos cantam. Por que não eu? Even captive birds sing. So why not I? It was tucked behind a loose floorboard in the drying shed. Or so you thought. He doesn't speak. Just holds it higher, then lets it drop into the bucket at your knees. You wrote this? Silence. That terrible humming silence. If you say yes, you'll be punished. If you say no, someone else might be blamed. And you both know it. I copied it, you say at last. A murmur, almost a prayer. He squints. From where? You hesitate. From a wall. He stares longer than necessary. You know we don't allow books, or copying, or poems. You nod slowly, not blinking. He straightens. Be at the post by sundown. We'll see how well those words sit in your mouth then. And just like that, he leaves. You continue scrubbing. You don't flinch. Not yet. But your stomach folds into itself. Your heart beats low and steady like a drum underwater. Word spreads fast. The kind of fast that doesn't use footsteps. Lucia finds you that afternoon, with eyes wide and face pale. We can hide you, she whispers. In the shed behind the drying house, the floor lifts, but you shake your head. It won't matter. They'll find you. And you're tired of running from words you created. By dusk, the plantation gathers, not for prayer, not for celebration, but for the spectacle. You're led to the punishment post, a rough timber nailed into the earth beside the whipping tree. There's a hush, not of reverence, but of anticipation. They tie your wrists loosely, as if daring you to break free. The overseer reads the poem aloud, mocking the meter, twisting the syllables. He doesn't understand it, but he feels the threat. You wait, but the lash doesn't come. Instead, the master approaches. Not the overseer, the master, in his starched linen coat and polished boots. His voice is thin, like water dripped from a cracked glass. He doesn't need the whip. He needs the word meaning the Bible, a punishment worse than the whip for someone like you. You're handed a copy of the Libro de Salmos, Book of Psalms, printed in large, clumsy type. Read it, the master says, aloud, each night, before the others. Let them hear you speak God's truth, not your own little rebellions. It's meant to shame you. It doesn't. You take the book, hold it steady. That night, you begin with Psalm 1. Bem-aventurado o homem que não anda segundo o conselho dos ímpios. Blessed is the man who walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. Your voice doesn't tremble, because here's the secret they forgot. The Bible has always been a rebellion. Tucked inside leather binding, you read aloud, verse after verse. Others listen, at first out of obligation, then out of habit, then out of hunger. The children begin mouthing along. The elders nod. Some smile when you get to the lines about captives and songs in foreign lands. They know. They know. The overseer doesn't hear it. But you do. The word is being reclaimed. After a few nights, someone adds their own lines after yours. A verse in Kikongo. Not from the Psalms, not from any scripture, but sacred all the same. You don't correct them. You just listen. Lucia begins scribbling her own psalm translations onto banana leaves. She reads them aloud, with her head bowed, pretending they're prayers when they're really parables of revolt. And one day, a boy walks up to you, holding a crumpled page from an old almanac. "Is this a psalm?" he asks. You read it. It's a weather forecast from Lisbon. But you nod and say, "It can be, because everything now is a psalm." If you read it with the right rhythm, even the plantation begins to shift, slightly, subtly. When a child spills cassava, the overseer hesitates before cursing. When the cook burns rice, she quotes Proverbs to cover it. Words are not feared anymore. They're used, sometimes clumsily, sometimes beautifully. And at the center of it, your voice. Not because it's loud, but because it survived. And so the Bible, meant to quiet you, becomes your loudest whisper. Each verse, a mirror. And one night, you close the book after Psalm 137, the one about Babylon. And you say softly, "We also wept." And no one asks why.